SPR and inflation. Strategic Petroleum Reserve hits historic low. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights, brought to you by Ainsley Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. Today, we welcome back Alex, who's been digging deep into the concept of oil and how that's going to impact the markets. How are you going today, Alex?
I'm going really well. How are you?
Very good, thank you. So, part of that deep dive in oil today, you've been really looking at this concept of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is something that probably not everyone's aware of. Some people will know a bit about it, but it's really what the US does to, I suppose, have a backup of oil, maybe, if that's a description. Can you maybe start off by talking a little bit about the history and background of the SPR and how that's really relevant to us today?
Yeah, so the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was introduced in about 1973 in the US in response to the Yom Kippur War, where basically there was an embargo on oil exports and the US started running out. And it started obviously causing huge inflation, as we now know oil does. And so in response, it was set up in Louisiana and Texas. They found some old salt caverns and they started filling it up with oil. So it basically...
So it's literally, they were literally filling holes in the ground with oil.
Literally old holes and salt holes.
Wow.
Yes. So yeah, they started filling them up with oil. It holds around 780 million barrels of oil, which I think the US consumes about 12 million barrels a day. So it's a reasonable backstop to have. And they use it, they've had it for emergency situations. It's run by the Department of Energy. It's meant to be independent. It's meant to, be filled up. But more recently, since about 2017, there's been a few changes in the US and the government, which means that it's become less independent. And certainly it's been used as a bit of a backstop for non-emergency things.
Right. So a big pile of, like a big hole full of oil is a lot of money sitting there, which kind of makes sense when you say the temptation is probably there for government to dip into that if they can find another, reason to. It solves some problems. But what specifically happened to cause the draining of the SPR more recently? Because I know that was really the focus today, is that it's sort of historically low. It's they just didn't go about refilling it. So how are they going with that refill? Is it something that looks like it's going to happen? What's really going on around the specifics of the drain and where we are on the refilling?
So up until 2020, it was being filled up. So it got to a reasonably high level. It had about 80 million barrels to go. Just to be clear, it's never been full. So it had 80 million barrels to go at $24 a barrel. Congress knocked it on the head, fine, and it was sitting at 700 million barrels. So that was 2020. In 2022, when the Ukraine war happened and oil started spiking to $120 a barrel, it was an emergency. So they needed to control inflation a little bit. So they tapped into the oil reserves and they've basically been slowly pulling it down. And it's the lowest level now since 1983. So it's around 360 million barrels, I think, are still remaining. So they've taken off about 340 million barrels during that time. The average price, which is all sort of on the SPR website, was $29.70 a barrel. They were selling it at $96 a barrel, so they were making a lovely profit.
Very profitable.
They've been draining it down to help with inflation. So the primary goal was this is an emergency because of the Russian war and the issues with Russia, Russian oil not hitting the market. We need to try and get prices down on petrol. So they managed to get their price per gallon down by, they estimate, 17 to 43 cents per gallon, which obviously helps inflation over the period. December, when prices started to normalize, we were back around $60 to $70 a barrel. US government said, right, time for us to refill the SPR. There's been a few attempts. They've probably filled it, I should know this, but I didn't do this, but 2 or 3 times with 3 or 4 million barrels.
Which is really a drop in the bucket, isn't it?
A drop in the salt cavern.
A drop in the salt cavern.
And so they, in July, said, right, we're going to refill 6 million barrels. The price was right. OPEC said, oh, we're cutting production further. The price has spiked, and they're now out of so they're trying to get it refilled at between $67 and $72 a barrel. It's now at 82, so opportunities missed. And, you know, if you look at what's been drained over the last year or last 2 years, it's drained out about 350 million barrels. Well, OPEC's had similar cuts, like they're now at 3.66 million barrels a day is their current cut. But if you go back over time, they've taken a similar amount out of their output. So to me, it looks like OPEC is strangling the US a little bit and not letting them refill at the price they want.
And what I never understood with this, because I was following it a little bit passively, I wasn't really watching it as closely as I probably should have been, but it seemed to me that there was a lot of song and dance around, we are definitely refilling it at this price level. And I remember it struck me at the time as, oh, well, you're telling everyone what you're going to do. So that's interesting because, you know, it allows games to be played if you tell everyone what price you're going to refill at. But then for that not to have happened, and you almost can't blame the other side for not letting it happen when you set up the situation in the first place and then didn't follow through. It feels like there's a lot of game playing going on there. Like, that's crazy.
A lot of forward market indicating, isn't it? But either way, every time they do it, OPEC seems to cut production. There was an interesting graph in the news today, which someone had, which basically there's been 3 or 4 times where America said we're doing it, and it's been 3 or 4 times within a day OPEC has changed their output. So they are thoroughly gaming it, which when you know what the market's doing, why wouldn't you do that? So
yeah, that makes sense. Like, you can't even get cranky at them for doing that because it's kind of on you for framing it that way, really, if that's the outcome.
Absolutely. So, but what's interesting will be the impact on oil inflation going forward. Energy inflation, as everyone knows, was what was sort of leading things into the last inflationary crisis.
Yep.
And the SPR was a great backstop to help, but it's one, no longer there, and 2, we're going back into rising prices again.
So can you maybe dig a little bit deeper on that? Because if there is this link, like maybe a little bit more about what that link is between oil and inflation, but also does this effectively, because I expect you're probably going to talk about that there is a link and that we've seen that link emerge. So does that mean that then we're effectively creating a future crisis, like by not being prepared here? And will we be looking back at this in 12 months going, well, of course we should have refilled? Like, it seems pretty obvious to me.
Well, going back to 2020, they should have refilled at $24 or taken the extra $80 million at $24 a barrel. So hindsight's one of those things that you can look at and go, should have, would have, could have, should have invested in Tesla, should have bought Bitcoin. Everyone does it. But, you know, this has helped stem inflation in the US. It's been a great backstop. There was a great opportunity in December 2020, 2022, to refill these oil reserves. They haven't taken it, which begs the question why it wasn't done. Because what actually used to happen with the SBR is they used to have an independent amount of money where the government couldn't tap it. So it gave them the ability to fill it, you know, within their own rights. But in 2017, Congress passed a law where the money can be given to the government. So why in December 2022 was it not refilled? They had a price target, it met the price target, and it wasn't done. So, you know, there was an inflationary reduction because it artificially held down the oil price. And if it is now artificial, by refilling it, if that is artificially going to push the price back up, it's only going to be inflationary again. So all they've done is kick this inflation can down the road again, and it's either going to come through again, you know, in these CPI figures, they're going to start lifting up again, or the US is going to have to do something more drastic, which is what you and I talked about happening more often than not, because The Fed rates, what we're on the 11th straight hike. If inflation starts creeping in again, we all know things are starting to creep. We know that FX markets are, really starting to move around. You've got Brazil currently dropping rates. You've got Japan trying to, extend out their interest rate targets on their 10-year bonds. So things are creaking and there's less room to move. So if this inflation does start pulling through, there's nowhere to go this time.
No, and I completely agree. There's certainly no runway for them to be able to do what they have done so far. Again, that's not possible.
No.
So it's a very it's a shortening by the day list of actions they can actually take. So it does, it's always difficult in these situations because you go, well, we've been saying similar things for quite a while now. So you go, well, is this just, is it Chicken Little? The sky's falling and it doesn't happen. But we have to be getting closer to a point where we do see some serious volatility entering the market because everything really has been pushed to extremes. And when you see this situation specifically with oil, that seems like a perfect catalyst.
And these partners of the US since, the 1980s, the partners of the US seem to be trying to push the US now to bigger extremes than they were at before. So, they're lifting the oil price every time they go to refill. There's a lot of pressures now hitting the US from other places because of what's going on in the markets.
And that's a really interesting point that sort of just popped into my head then. There's been sort of a lack of response from the US. In the past, some of these similar moves would have been quite front and center in the response. So you would have got it might have just been a spoken response. It might have just been open mouth operations, as we say. But you would have had quite a severe calling out of any of these things happening in the background. But it's like there's too many of them. They're all ganging up. It feels like a little bit on the US in this situation, and you're really not hearing a lot of that as we have in the past.
No, there was usually a push from the US where you'd see in the paper that they're suggesting to OPEC that they don't do that. But it is just, everyone's just going with the flow now and just letting it happen. So, yeah, it's certainly less than what you'd used to see.
Fascinating, as always. Well, Alex, thank you for that. It's an area, like all the areas we follow, we need to keep paying attention to, but I don't think we've really dug that deep on oil for a little while. So I think that was really good today to bring us all up to speed. So thanks for that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to watch the oil market. It doesn't look stable at the moment. And as we all know, that brings some of the biggest instability to the world. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks everyone for watching. Remember, any questions, comments, reach out on those social platforms. That's us for today. We'll be back on Thursday with Sam to discuss all things markets and metals. Until then, have a great rest of the week, everyone.